cow's milk, hard work, and other things some people claim are white supremacy. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. You know how white supremacy used to be like, white supremacy? It used to be pretty easy to spot. When a group of white people who looked like this gathered and said they were the superior race, you could point to that and say with moderate confidence, that's white supremacy. It's kind of like that old saying, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and doesn't want its daughter marrying a mallard, that's a racist duck. Well, things aren't quite that simple anymore. Racism isn't exactly mainstream like it used to be, which is a good thing. Racism is so frowned upon that even the KKK doesn't want to be labeled as a hate group anymore. That's their whole thing. That would be like IHOP not wanting to be known for pancakes, which they actually tried. I assume the KKK's rebranding will be just as much of a fail. But since hate groups no longer want to be known as hate groups, many have to resort to covert racism. Sneaky, covert racism. That's my fourth least favorite type of racism, behind violent racism, aggressive racism, and beat poetry racism. Since so much racism is covert nowadays, it can be hard to spot. Many think it's lurking in code words used by politicians, or hidden in the ranks of law enforcement. That may be the case, but feels like some people are trying so hard to find white supremacy, they're seeing it in places that may not actually exist. There are some truly wild things some people claim are white supremacy that are pretty hard to swallow. Starting with number 7, cow's milk. You didn't think I was being literal when I said hard to swallow, did you? Apparently, some white supremacists are allegedly using milk as a sign of their superiority. And not just because it's white, but because they incorrectly believe they're the only race that can properly digest it, and that makes them superior. Because of this, some groups, including PETA, are suggesting that cow's milk is the official beverage of white supremacists, and drinking it perpetuates racism. Okay, firstly, PETA doesn't want anyone drinking anything that comes from animals. PETA would never exploit animals, only women's bodies. And secondly, actual white supremacists will use anything as an excuse to say they're superior. The fact you don't see too many accordion players of color? Clearly, this proves Caucasians are the master race. Weird Al Yankovic, white supremacist. Also, I think milk is the perfect beverage to fight racism, because it shows you only make something better when you taint the purity of its whiteness by mixing it with chocolate. Speaking of things you mix with milk, number 6, coffee. If milk is racist, so is coffee. And if you pour milk in your coffee, full-on hate crime. The argument that white people drinking coffee is racist and helps perpetuate white supremacy stems from the arguments that coffee was appropriated from African culture, and slaves were used to harvest coffee in Europe and America. However, there's a lot of discrepancy in the history of how coffee was first introduced to Europeans. It may have come through a Venetian physician who brought it back with him after visiting North Africa, but it may also have been introduced when the Turks invaded Hungary and left coffee beans behind after battles. So coffee may have been appropriated by Europeans from Africa, or it may have been appropriated from the Ottomans. And while slaves were eventually used to harvest coffee, slaves also harvested rice, corn, sugarcane, cotton, and tobacco. And those aren't considered tools of white supremacy. Well, actually, some argued that tobacco is a tool of white supremacy, but not for white people who smoke, because tobacco companies target non-white communities, as they're often more likely to use their products. So, white people drinking coffee, white supremacy. Black people smoking, white supremacy. I'm going to need a chart to keep track of what is or isn't white supremacy. Ironically, to pull the all-nighter I'd need to make this chart, I'm going to need a lot of coffee. My point is, there's a lot of inconsistencies in the argument that coffee is a tool of white supremacy, especially when the U.S. gets most of its coffee these days from South America. You need to do a lot of hard work and some irrational thinking to get to that conclusion. Hey, speaking of which, number 5, hard work and rational thinking. The Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture unveiled guidelines they said were associated with and assumed to be inherent to white culture. Listed among them were hard work and rational thinking. Thanks? The Smithsonian ultimately removed the guidelines and apologized, for saying that hard work and rational thinking are things assumed to be inherent to white culture. You do realize that hard work and rational thinking are traits valued by most every culture, right? This would be like, actually, you know what? Right here is usually where I make a hilarious and perfectly apt analogy, but I honestly don't think I can articulate what they were trying to imply without sounding super racist. Trying so hard to not be racist that you wind up being racist is like fighting fires with so much fire you create more fires that you decide to also fight with fire. Then when someone suggests a different approach, you accuse them of promoting white supremacy by thinking rationally. What'd I tell you? Hilarious, perfectly apt analogy. This isn't the only instance of people trying so hard to not be racist that they make assumptions that are wildly racist. Explain after the break. Welcome back. Unless this episode was demonetized by YouTube for white supremacy, which I'm fairly certain is going to happen. Please support us at patreon.com/AmericaUncovered. All it takes is $1 an episode. You can also set a monthly limit. So you know what else is racist? Number 4, math. Well, that makes sense. As I've said before, math is obviously racist, since it literally teaches division. As ridiculous as it sounds, some schools have actually released frameworks for studying math through a cultural lens, because they believe it has been appropriated by Western culture and has been used to oppress people of color, which is ridiculous, because math oppresses every student who takes it. Not surprisingly, the passing rate of students in this math is racist pilot program plummeted. Apparently 9 times 5 equals down with colonialism is not an acceptable answer. Everyone knows 9 times 5 is 11? Like I said, math oppresses everybody. Look, you can argue that white supremacy is in the curriculum of history by the narratives they tell and what they choose to include. Or you can argue it's an English class by the novels they require the students to read. But math is objective, and objectivity is not white supremacy. Unless, number 3, objectivity is white supremacy. Yes, some journalists are actually saying that objectivity is objectively perpetuating white supremacy. I did a whole episode on this, link is below. The gist of the argument is that objectivity is a standard that has been set by white, rich, heterosexual, cisgender white men. Gotta say white twice so you know they're the ones behind it. And since white people set that standard, objectivity is a tool of white supremacy. Just like hard work and rational thinking. But the people making this argument have proposed a solution. Journalists shouldn't be objective. Instead, they should craft narratives based on their own experiences, which sounds great if you want to get into writing fiction. Journalism is supposed to be objective. That's literally journalists' only job. The fact they're not anymore is why Americans' trust in the media is near an all-time low. So if objective reality is white supremacy, what isn't? A digital reality like in the Matrix? Honestly, all these arguments are starting to make me believe we're living in a simulation and there's a glitch in the system, objectively. Number 2, eating meat is also white supremacy, at least according to a survey of 1,000 meat eaters and their justifications for eating dead animals. The study, conducted by multiple universities, found that one of the main justifications for eating meat was people thinking humans are dominant in a hierarchical system of nature. Do you see where this is going? The researchers then found that people with this belief system are more likely to hold right-wing, authoritarian views and see themselves as superior to other groups. However, one researcher pointed out this does not mean that meat-eating people are automatically more likely to exhibit prejudice towards other groups of people. I would hope not, because kids love chicken nuggets. Just look at this little bigot. I bet he dips that in ranch because it's made with buttermilk. These researchers said while there's a slight correlation, there's not enough evidence to say eating meat makes you racist, which sounds like objective thinking. Get them! They're racists! So does this mean you should give up eating meat if you don't want to be seen as racist? Well, you know what else is racist? Number 1, being vegan. So eating meat is white supremacy, and not eating meat is also white supremacy. So what are white allies trying to fight systemic oppression supposed to eat? Fake meat? Actually, that's something they've tried. Not sure how well that turned out. I blame the fact they trusted something with fake literally in their name. So why is veganism, specifically white veganism as it's called, considered racist? It's because veganism is seen by some as exclusionary because it's expensive and a lot of lower income communities are non-white and can't afford a vegan diet. There are also a lot of lower income communities that are predominantly white, but why let that get in the way of an argument? Wouldn't want to think rationally or be objective now. It sounds like veganism is more of a class issue than a race issue to me, but here's another argument that veganism is racist. Many vegans choose not to eat meat to help the environment. And since climate change allegedly hurts communities of color the most, and that's hardly ever mentioned by vegans, that makes them racist. So they're doing the right thing, but for the wrong reasons. And that's white supremacy. Vegans don't talk about their actions being done for people of color because that would sound insane at best and super racist at worst. How can you eat that hamburger? Don't you know black people are suffering? You should eat this $19 quinoa patty instead, which black people can't afford, by the way, and it's important to acknowledge that. I'm helping. Ma'am, this is a Wendy's. Now I want to be very clear. White supremacy is still out there, and where it exists, it's a problem. But when you say everything is white supremacy, people tend to take all your claims less seriously. Then when it actually rears its ugly shaved head, no one will believe you because they assume you can't actually tell the difference between what actually is and isn't white supremacy. So what do you think? What are other wild things that people are claiming to be white supremacy? Leave your comments below. If you want to help us deliver nonpartisan news, be sure to support America Uncovered by going to patreon.com/America Uncovered. All it takes is as little as $1 or more per episode to fight YouTube censorship and demonetization. We rely on your support to help us keep making great episodes. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.